It's time for the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is the voice of the working class, Rick Smith.
And welcome, brothers, sisters, working class heroes. This is the Rick Smith Show. Thanks so much for being here today on the big program. Lots to get to, lots to talk about. It is Martin Luther King Jr. Day, a day of remembrance, a day to think back and remember the history of the country, a day to think about African American history, a day to think about the civil rights movement, a day to, well, think about the history of America. And I know I'm going to get some, are you talking, that theory about race that's critical? Kind of talking about actual history. And kind of what made me back in 2015 pack up the kids and the show and head out on I think we were almost a month we were on the road, traveling throughout the southern U.S., looking for history, going to the places across the South where we treated black people really, really poorly. And in those places now, we have tourism. It's almost like, hey, come see how bad we were. See how bad we were to people, how we mistreated people, and just how bad we did. And I remember when we started. Now, as a white guy, I grew up in a housing project on the west side of Cleveland, a minority in a minority community. I had always thought that I had kind of an understanding of race relations, of the tensions between blacks and whites, and the fights that went on. It wasn't until I did that tour, and look, I was well into my, I was older. Let's put it that way. It wasn't until then that I really realized just how bad our history was. And the images that we saw, the places that we visited, the people that we spoke to, the stories, and understand, this wasn't ancient history. This was in a lifetime. This was, people sharing their lived experiences. And I remember going to Birmingham, Alabama, where some of the worst things took place. And I remember looking at the door to the cell where Dr. King was held, and behind that cell door wrote letters from the Birmingham jail, and putting my hands on that cell door and thinking about what that meant and how far we've come as a country, and how much further we need to go, and the divisions that it's caused, and what it meant to everyone. And the thing that kept coming up in our trip is that race was always used as the dividing tool to keep people against each other for economic purposes. And for me, it's always been about the economy. It's always been about ensuring that people can put food on the table, keep a roof over their head. Anybody who's watched this show or listened or paid attention to us over the years knows that that's the focus. I've always believed it's not about white or black. It's not about red hat or blue hat. It's about green. It's about money. It's about the economy. It's about workers getting a fair share of the wealth that their labor creates. It's about ensuring that families have enough food to put on the table, about kids having opportunities. It's about that American dream. It's about that thing that I grew up believing in as a kid, that if you worked hard, you played by the rules, that you got ahead. And race was one of those things that was always there to divide us, to pit us against each other. And it was convenient because it was always there. And we went to a place in Tennessee where, if the white miners went on strike, the governor would send in the convicts, because they had a convict lease program where they'd send in the convicts to break the strike. And the white miners would be mad because you got these black miners coming in, taking their jobs without understanding that, hey, these are prisoners that are being marched in here, being sold to these companies. And it's really it's the wealth class, it's the moneyed interests who are screwing both sides over. And what I came away with, and what I come away with every time I sit down and I think about this, is the sooner we heal this division, the sooner we figure out how to bridge this gap, the sooner we're able to unite and go after the real problems. And that's the people who have been lining their pocket at our expense. And Dr. King understood that. I mean, I found it interesting that, when you go to his center in Atlanta, that, Coca-Cola is right across the way. And, big sponsor, and lots of money went in there. When that's the target of who he was going after. What good is it that you can sit at a lunch counter if you can't afford to buy a hamburger? What good is it that you have rights if you don't have the ability to participate? And that's always made sense to me. So for me, on Martin Luther King Jr. Day, I always read the letter from the Birmingham jail. That's one of those things that where my mind goes. And I think about that history tour. Never meant that much to me before that tour. But going and being in those places and hearing those stories, it changed me. And this is why I think history is so important. Why I think actual, real history, not propagandized nonsense like we see coming out of certain talk show hosts, little university things, but actual history, lived experiences. That's important. And on this day, I hope people will take the time to, read the letter. It is fairly lengthy. And think about, how do we heal this rift? And how do we bridge this gap so that together we can move forward and grow and quite frankly, how do we get to a position where we go, you know what? We're going to go after the real culprit in all this. For me, that's where I want to go. But today, for the holiday, I want to talk to my good friend, former Alabama Senator Doug Jones. Doug is, an icon in the civil rights arena. As a federal prosecutor, went after the people who bombed the 16th Street Baptist Church. So when we come back, Doug Jones will be here to share some thoughts on the day. Back after this.
The old factory towns in America's heartland have been taking a beating. Thing is, though, there's a light at the end of the tunnel. Unions are making a comeback. More organizing in the last couple of years than in a long time. And the Biden administration being more supportive of unions than any president since FDR. We're finally turning things around after 40 years of screwing over working people. But will we keep moving in the right direction? That's our choice as Americans.
So, the importance of this holiday, this is one of those holidays that it's easy to not think about the importance of. And for me as a labor guy, when we did our labor history tour and we did our civil rights tour, civil rights played a lot into that. The idea that race was used as a divider. It was used to keep people apart so that we were fighting each other instead of the bosses and the moneyed interest, and that was all part of the gig. That was part of the game. That was one of those moments that you go, this is why we need to be, if not just to do the right thing, this is why we need to be coming together. And here to share some thoughts on why Martin Luther King Jr. holiday is so important and why this day is something we should be paying more attention to. I've asked our good friend, former Alabama Senator Doug Jones, to spend a little time with us and share some of his thoughts. Doug, thanks for taking time for us.
Rick, it's always great to be with you, especially on a special weekend like this day. It's always good to be with you.
So this is one of the holidays that, I don't know that gets enough attention. I think it should. Like all holidays, there's a reason that it's special, but I don't know that we give this one the reverence and the celebration I think that it deserves. Or do you disagree?
No, I don't disagree, but I do think it is growing more and more each year, especially as people reflect on Dr. King's life and his works and where we are in this country. You see across the country more and more, I think, that the celebrations in various cities, the breakfasts, the dinners. I was at a big award ceremony Friday night in Tuscaloosa, and awards are given. And then you have the day of service that's also part of the long weekend. All of that has been expanded over time. So I think you're right, and I'd love to see it get more reference, but I think it's growing, and more people are recognizing it and actually taking the day off, and that's a big deal too.
Yeah, I mean, when you think about African American history, Chris Rock does a bit about taking African American history and everything being about Martin Luther King Jr. and when we did our civil rights tour, there was so much more to the history of this country and its civil rights, but a lot of it was around Dr. King. And we were in your neck of the woods down in Birmingham, and I'll never forget the Civil Rights Institute there in your backyard, where they have the jail cell that Dr. King was behind, where he wrote the letters from a Birmingham jail, and I just remember touching that bit of history, going, is there a way for this country to move forward and not have this kind of division?
Well, look, there is, but we've got to want to do that. First of all, I think people talk about that a lot, Rick, but they really don't want it. They like the division. They like us against them, our team versus your team, and they want to win. And I think that has gone way, way too far at this point. And there are ways to do that. And you touched on an important piece of this, and that is the letter from a Birmingham jail that Dr. King wrote in 1963. It was smuggled out of the jail on bits and pieces of paper, newsprint, napkins, you name it, and had to be pieced together by his secretary. And it really was, he had long since been released from the jail before it was really ever published in the summer of 1963. But that piece of that document is one of the most important documents I think this country has ever had. That short of the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution, it is an incredibly important document, and it lays out exactly the whys, the wheres, and how I think people can come together in a bond and a mutual respect. And if people would see that, I guarantee that, Rick, that not enough people in this country have even read that letter. It's a lengthy letter. And when I was in the Senate, we started a tradition of reading that letter on the floor of the Senate. Every year, 3 Republicans and 3 Democrats read it. Sherrod Brown has picked that up and doing it. I think it starts from the teachings that Dr. King espoused and so many others, and that followed that. And we can get back to that if people want to do it, if they truly want to get back to there. And I think that's the tougher part, is getting people to realize how important it is to do it.
Yeah, I go back to, since I like quotes sometimes, the quote attributed to Jay Gould, I can pay half the working class to murder the other half. And race is one of those dividing lines that the wealth class has always been able to use to keep people divided. And you look at one of the things that's happened, in this country over the last 40, 50 years, the re-rising of inequality and the poverty that's happened. And race has been at the heart of that division. And in my view, and maybe you'll agree, the only way that I think we bring inequality back to the sane is that we heal that racial divide.
Yeah, look, Rick, I think that divide has expanded so much as America became a more diverse country. whether it is African Americans, Hispanics, the Asian population that's growing. I think as America grew as a country and became more and more diverse, and that's just, and that includes, folks who are born of interracial marriages. Those kind, it all comes into play, and as that has happened, there has been more divisions based on race. I think people are afraid. People are scared. They don't want to see what they have or have had, and they believe this country was built in a certain way. They don't want to give up this perceived power that they have, or this perceived place in this country. And the fact of the matter is, this country, I think, was somewhat always destined to be a multiracial, multicultural country. That we were the melting pot. There was a reason we were the land of opportunity, more so than any country on the planet. And so people came to this country and they worked hard. And I think that as we continue that diversity, it is a tension. And it's a tension that I think we've got to teach people and learn the respect, but also teach people that we should celebrate that diversity. It makes us stronger. I am absolutely convinced it makes us stronger as a people if we can celebrate that equality and celebrate that diversity. But it's just damn not easy, especially when you've got demagogues on one side who are just exploiting those divisions. That is a huge problem that we've got in this country right now. The people in power who want to exploit those divisions for their own political purposes.
Yeah, and you've got the other ones who are just in it for the economics. I look at
Sure.
the right wing, the spin machine. I look at the echo chamber, who it's all about the daily outrage, and the race card is a huge part of that. But let me ask you, on this Martin Luther King Jr. Day, what can we learn from his leadership, his activism? What can we learn from him, and how can we apply that so that maybe we can overcome some of these challenges, and maybe we can make some positive social and political changes?
Rick, I think there's a lot to Dr. King that we can learn from. But something that jumps out to me right now is the nonviolence, the way he went about things. He continually, from day one, preached nonviolence, preached trying to do things in a nonviolent way. And I am very concerned in this country about the political violence that we're seeing every day, the swatting that's going on, primarily from the right, but we've had people on the left that have called in those SWAT teams as well. That is going to lead to some disastrous consequences at some point. And I think if people will step back, people might agree to disagree with Dr. King on a number of issues. But the fact of the matter is, he talked about it. He discussed it. He persuaded people. He showed that inequality was not only immoral, but it was something that was holding this country back. I mean, we like to proclaim that we became a democracy when the Constitution was signed. That's not true. We didn't. It wasn't until people fully got the right to vote where we truly became a democracy. This country is, as a true democratic republic, is only about 60 years old from the time of the Voting Rights Act.
Right.
And so I think we can learn if we follow not only what he was saying, but the way he was saying it and the things that he was espousing to get to a certain point through nonviolent ways. We really have to start stressing that people need to reset their political norms and their political discussions right now, and get away from anything that can be construed as a call to violence. We're seeing way too much of that right now.
Well, what role do you think each of us can play in advocating for social change, for social justice, for creating positive change? What do you think we can do?
I think it depends on where you are and what you do. You've got a microphone, Rick. I'm looking at it right here, and you do it all the time. I've been on this show with you before. We've talked privately. We've had lunch. We've talked about this, and we do these things. And you've got a microphone. Other people don't have your microphone, but they do have friends. They do have family. they go to church, they go to other civic clubs, and they need to call out. In 1963, when the bomb exploded at the 16th Street Baptist Church, there was a young lawyer in Birmingham named Charles Morgan. Chuck Morgan was one of the white lawyers who was trying to make positive change in Birmingham, the city that Dr. King described as the most segregated city in America. The day after that church bombing, he gave a kind of a speech that had just kept him up all night. It was one of those not planned speeches except until the bombing happened. And when he did so, that he essentially indicted all the establishment, the political establishment, the social establishment, everyone. And he did it in a way that was not saying that they were bad people, but they were saying that it was our silence, the silence of the good people that Dr. King talked about. We allow this happen. Every time there's a racial joke that rocks the house with laughter, we propagate and we give power to those people that planted that bomb. I think that we have to kind of call things out a little bit, even if it's people that we know and that we generally agree with. If they cross a line about any of this, we need to call them out. And we're seeing it. We're seeing it in the Democratic Party, where we've got people now that have become so anti-Semitic because of the war going on between Israel and Hamas right now. And we've got to stop that. We've got to pull people back to say, let's do. We agree that there are things happening that we'd like to see change, but we don't need to get to a point that we're calling, that we're being as anti-Semitic and putting people in violence. So I think individuals have to search a little bit deep and have to watch themselves in what they say and how they're careful. But I think we also have to engage. I think we have to continue to engage with people that we don't always agree with, get out of our comfort zone, as I said, to try to reset the norms, because we are way outside the norms that this country has been used to.
Yeah, when you talk about the violence, and you brought up the 16th Street Baptist Church bombing, it's one of those moments that I will never forget. When we did our civil rights tour back in 2015, we went through the Civil Rights Institute there in Birmingham, and I've told this story a bunch of times where we went to, there was a little case that had the belongings of the little girls in it, and at the time my daughters were some right around that age, and
right.
The purses in that case could have been my daughters, and that grabbed me, and even to this day it still grabs at the heartstrings.
Yeah, no, trust me, I know it full well. As you describe it, I can see it. I've lived that. We used them as exhibits, and it's a powerful reminder of how domestic terrorism for political purposes took innocent lives. These children, those kids, those girls had not taken to the streets in Birmingham. They weren't out doing mischief. They were just innocent kids on a Sunday morning about to engage in a youth worship service. And it's a stark reminder. And I'm so proud of the way that Birmingham has come to acknowledge and accept and not celebrate, but to some extent, you can use the word celebrate. You certainly celebrate those children and the lives that were lost, because they were the martyrs for freedom. And it really did arouse the conscience of this country when that happened. And what I don't want to see happen are more violent acts that arouse the country. We seem to respond to that. And I'm not saying that that's not appropriate. It is certainly just the way we responded to the George Floyd murder. But we ought to be able to do that without somebody dying, without an explosion, without a gun, without a knee on somebody's neck. We ought to be able to do that on a daily basis. And I think that that's exactly what Martin Luther King Jr. was telling us throughout his entire life.
Last word on this, what's the message of the day for folks? What do you think?
I think the message of the day is to not just celebrate another holiday by taking off work and by sitting around and watching or even working around the house. I think today should be a day of reflection. You know, July 4th is a day of celebration with fireworks and barbecues. We celebrate Veterans Day and we go to the parks and we do these things. Martin Luther King's holiday should be a day of reflection about who you are, who we are. And that, I think that is something that if people would just take that time and really reflect on where we are as a country, the ideals that he espoused and where we need to be, and what we, as you said a minute ago, what individual, can I do to make this country live up to its ideals of America and equality. I think that's the message.
Yeah, there you go. Doug, I got to take a break. For the folks watching on Free Speech TV, thanks so much for tuning in. We'll see you back here next time. For our radio affiliates, we're going to take a quick break and back right here with Doug Jones, the former senator from Alabama. For folks, if you miss any portion of the program, download the podcast. Always there, always available. Wherever you get your favorite podcast, you'll find ours. And, of course, if you miss any portion of the program, get it there. Also, you can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com, with any thoughts, questions, comments. Back after this. Before we close the program, we want to take a moment to thank our viewers and to share a little bit about why we do what we do. At The Rick Smith Show, we believe that media today is almost entirely controlled by corporate greed. So we have now 24-hour news channels. But instead of 24 hours of news, what we get is 1 hour repeated 24 times, and with tons of commercials creating obscene amounts of profits. Information once presented as a public service has now become a private commodity. So when lies make money, lies are what we get. We get a corporate-controlled rage machine feeding us anger and hate, trying to convince us that our problems are right, left, or red, blue, when they are and always have been up, down, the wealthiest 1% versus the rest of us. Our goal is to be an alternative to that machine, not as a news show with a fancy journalist out front, but as a talk show run by a union truck driver and a team of working class heroes just like you. Everything we do, both what we get right and what we get wrong, is dedicated to advancing the interests of America's working families. No corporate ad buys, no think tanks, no focus groups, no talking points. We are media by working people, for working people. Thanks for tuning in. We'll see you back here next time.